Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to welcome you to today's presentation. Today, we're going to explore a pivotal event in history, the French Revolution. This presentation will cover the key causes, major events, and lasting impacts of the revolution. So, let's get started and dive into this fascinating period that reshaped France and the world. Let's take a closer look at slide 2, which covers French society in the 18th century. During this period, society was divided into three main estates. The first estate, which was the clergy, the second estate, the nobility, and the third estate, which included commoners, artisans, farmers, and increasingly, the middle class. This social structure created significant inequalities, especially for the third estate, which bore the heaviest tax burden and had the least political power. Understanding this social hierarchy is crucial because it set the stage for many of the tensions and conflicts that would eventually lead to the French Revolution. The disparities and frustrations within this system fueled demands for change, rights, and a more equitable society. Now, as we explore this slide, keep in mind how these social divisions contributed to the broader causes of upheaval and reform during this transformative period in France's history. On July 14, 1789, Paris was in a state of alarm and unrest. King Louis XVI had ordered troops to move into the city, which heightened tensions among the people. In response, about 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall, determined to take action. They decided to form a people's militia to defend themselves and their rights. The crowd then targeted government buildings, breaking into them in search of weapons. Their main goal was to storm the Bastille, a fortress prison that symbolized royal authority and despotic power. During the attack, they killed the commander and freed a small number of prisoners, only 7 in total. The Bastille was hated by everyone because it represented the king's oppressive rule. After capturing it, the crowd demolished the fortress, and fragments of it were sold in the marketplace. This event marked a turning point in the revolution, symbolizing the people's fight against tyranny and the beginning of a new era. In 1774, Louis XVI from the Bourbon family ascended the throne, and he was only 20 years old at the time. He was married to Marie Antoinette, an Austrian princess. When he took power, he found the treasury completely empty. This was mainly because years of war had drained the country's financial resources. He also spent a lot of money on maintaining an extravagant court at Versailles, which was very costly. Additionally, France had helped the American colonies fight for independence from Britain, and that war added 1 billion livres to an already substantial debt, over 2 billion livres. Lenders, worried about the growing debt, started charging high interest rates, around 10% on loans. To cover regular expenses like the army, court, and government offices, Louis XVI was forced to increase taxes. All of these economic issues created a financial crisis that contributed to the unrest in French society, setting the stage for the broader themes of inequality and discontent that we'll explore further. Let's take a closer look at French society during this period. French society was quite complex, with a highly stratified social structure. At the top, you had the monarchy and the nobility, who held a great deal of power and privilege. Below them, there was a growing bourgeoisie, a rising middle class that was gaining influence through commerce and industry. Then, at the bottom, the common people, including peasants and urban workers, faced many hardships and had limited rights. Understanding these social divisions is key to grasping the broader themes of unrest and change that we see unfolding in France during this era. These social dynamics set the stage for the revolutionary ideas that would challenge existing hierarchies and push for a more egalitarian society. So, when we look at the social causes leading up to the French Revolution, it's important to understand that French society was deeply rooted in the feudal system. Before 1789, the society and institutions of France are often referred to as the Old Regime. During this period, only the third estate, meaning common people like peasants, city workers, and the bourgeoisie, were responsible for paying taxes. Meanwhile, the vast majority of the population, around 90%, were peasants living in rural areas. It's significant to note that land ownership was concentrated heavily in the hands of the nobles and the church, about 60% of the land. These groups enjoyed many privileges, including exemption from taxes, which created a huge imbalance. The clergy and nobility didn't have to pay taxes at all, which was a major point of inequality. Furthermore, nobles held feudal privileges, such as collecting dues and fees from their vassals and peasants. Peasants, on their part, were obliged to render various services to their lords, whether it's labor, payments, or other obligations. All of these social and economic structures contributed to the widespread dissatisfaction and unrest that eventually fueled the revolutionary movement. So, in essence, the deeply ingrained social inequalities played a crucial role in shaping the course of the French Revolution. On this slide, we're focusing on the role of the church in the taxation system. The church collected what was called tithes, which was a kind of tax. This tax was usually 1/10 of the agricultural produce, so farmers would give 1/10 of their harvest to the church. It was a significant source of income for religious institutions at the time. In addition to tithes, there was also a direct tax known as the taille. The taille was paid directly to the state, meaning it was a more straightforward tax on individuals or landowners. It's important to understand that these direct taxes often placed a heavy burden on the common people, especially the third estate, which included peasants, artisans, and laborers. Beyond these, there were also indirect taxes. These were paid when buying everyday items like salt and tobacco. These taxes might seem small individually, but they added up and affected daily life for many. Overall, what's clear is that the burden of these taxes, whether direct or indirect, was primarily borne by the third estate. This imbalance played a big role in the social tensions leading up to the revolution, as the lower classes felt increasingly squeezed and unfairly taxed. Connecting this to the broader theme, it shows how systemic inequality in taxation contributed to the unrest that eventually led to major societal change. Now let's turn our attention to a very critical issue: the struggle to survive. Specifically, we're talking about a subsistence crisis. So what exactly does that mean? Well, a subsistence crisis is an extreme situation where people's basic means of livelihood are at risk or even completely endangered. It's not just about economic downturns, it's about the very foundation of survival, food, water, shelter, being threatened. This kind of crisis highlights how fragile some communities are when their essential resources are compromised. Understanding this helps us see the broader picture of human resilience and the importance of safeguarding those basic needs, especially in times of upheaval or conflict. It's a stark reminder of how critical it is to address these fundamental issues if we want to build more stable and sustainable societies. As we look at the subsistence crisis, it's clear that the population was growing rapidly, from about 23 million in 1715 to 28 million by 1789. This sharp increase meant there was a much higher demand for food, especially grains, which were a staple in people's diets. However, agricultural production simply couldn't keep up with this surge in demand, leading to a significant problem. Because there wasn't enough grain to go around, the price of bread, a basic food for most people, started to rise quickly. At the same time, wages for workers didn't increase at the same pace, which meant many ordinary folks struggled to afford bread and other essentials. This created a widening gap between the rich and the poor, intensifying social tensions. And then, on top of these economic issues, there were natural calamities like droughts and hailstorms that further reduced harvests. So, the situation worsened, with food shortages becoming more severe, fueling unrest and frustration among the common people. This crisis was a key factor in the unrest leading up to the broader social upheavals we're discussing today. Now, on this slide, we see that the 18th century marked the rise of a new social group known as the middle class. This group gained wealth primarily through overseas trade and manufacturing, especially in wool and silk. It's interesting to note that many merchants, manufacturers, lawyers, and administrative officials were well educated and believed that social status should be based on merit rather than just birthright. They argued that no one should be privileged solely because of their family background. This idea was part of a broader philosophical movement that promoted the notion of a society built on freedom, with equal laws and equal opportunities for everyone. These concepts tie into the larger theme of societal change and the push towards greater equality that we're exploring in this presentation. Let's take a closer look at the role of philosophers and their ideas in shaping political thought. First, we have John Locke, who authored the two treatises of government. Locke emphasized the importance of natural rights, life, liberty, and property, and believed that governments should exist only with the consent of the governed to protect these rights. His ideas laid the groundwork for the concept of limited government and the idea that power should be derived from the people. Next, we have Jean-Jacques Rousseau and his work, The Social Contract. Rousseau argued that legitimate political authority comes from an agreement or social contract among citizens. He stressed the importance of general will, what is best for the community, and believed that true freedom is found in participation and alignment with the collective good. Finally, Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws introduced the idea of separation of powers. He believed that dividing government into different branches, legislative, executive, and judicial, was essential to prevent tyranny and ensure liberty. His ideas about checks and balances are still fundamental to modern democratic systems. Overall, these philosophers contributed key concepts about individual rights, the social contract, and the structure of government, which continue to influence our understanding of political authority today. Their work helps us see that ideas and reasoning play a crucial role in shaping the political landscape. Now, let's explore the role of some influential philosophers in shaping political thought. First, John Locke, in his two treatises of government, challenged the idea of divine and absolute rights of monarchs. He argued that power does not come from divine right, but from the consent of the governed, emphasizing the importance of natural rights like life, liberty, and property. Moving on to Rousseau, in The Social Contract, he proposed that legitimate government is based on a social contract between the people and their representatives. This means that governments derive their authority from the people, and in return, they must serve the common good. Finally, Montesquieu, in The Spirit of the Law, introduced the idea of dividing government power into separate branches, legislative, executive, and judiciary. This separation of powers is crucial to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful and to promote a system of checks and balances. Together, these philosophers laid foundational ideas that continue to influence modern political systems, reinforcing the overall theme of the importance of justified authority and the need for balanced governance. On this slide, we're exploring how ideas of the philosophers started to influence the people and challenge the existing system. These ideas were often discussed in salons and coffee houses, places where intellectuals and common folk alike gathered to debate and share their thoughts. The spread of these ideas was further amplified through books and newspapers, making revolutionary concepts accessible beyond just the educated elite. For those who couldn't read or write, these ideas were still shared aloud in gatherings or street discussions, ensuring that the message reached a broader audience. A key event that sparked widespread protest was the imposition of taxes by Louis XVI. This unfair tax angered many, fueling resentment against the system that seemed to favor the wealthy and powerful. It's important to see how these ideas and grievances came together, philosophical discussions fueling anger, which then turned into active protests against injustice and inequality. This overall theme of challenging the system through ideas and action is central to understanding the revolutionary spirit that was growing at this time. In the old regime, the king didn't have the authority to impose taxes directly. Instead, he had to summon the Estates General, which was a political body representing the three estates of France. The last time this assembly had met was back in 1614, so it was quite a rare event. On May 5th, 1789, King Louis XVI called for a new meeting of the Estates General, and it was held in the magnificent Hall of Versailles. The first and second estates, which represented the clergy and the nobility, each sent about 300 members. The third estate, representing commoners like peasants and artisans, sent 600 members, though they had to stand at the back of the hall. It's important to note that peasants, artisans, and women were not allowed to enter the meeting itself, but they still played a role, sending around 40,000 letters to express their opinions and concerns. This gathering was a crucial moment because it marked the beginning of a collective challenge to the old regime, setting the stage for the revolutionary upheaval that was to come. Now, when it came to voting in the Estates General, each estate, clergy, nobility, and commoners, had traditionally been given one vote. Louis XVI wanted to keep things the way they were, which meant that each estate would vote as a whole, rather than individual members. However, the Third Estate, representing the common people, felt this was unfair. They demanded that each member have one vote, advocating for a more democratic approach. This idea was inspired by Rousseau's social contract, which emphasized equal rights and fair representation. The king, however, rejected this proposal, seeing it as a threat to the existing hierarchy. This rejection was a turning point, and in response, the Third Estate decided to walk out. This moment is crucial because it highlights the growing tension between the monarchy and the people, and it reflects the broader push for equality and democratic principles that fueled the revolution. It reminds us how these voting disputes were more than just procedural. They were about power, fairness, and the future of France. On the 20th of June, they gathered in what might seem like an unlikely place, the hall of an indoor tennis court at Versailles. But this was no ordinary game or sport. It was a pivotal moment in history. They declared themselves as the National Assembly, symbolizing their unity and commitment to change. Their pledge was clear. They wouldn't disperse until they had drafted a new constitution for France, one that would limit the absolute power of the king and create a more balanced government. Leading this movement were influential figures like ICSE and Mirabeau, who played crucial roles in shaping the revolution. ICSE, a priest, authored a powerful pamphlet titled, "What is the Third Estate?" which challenged the traditional social order and emphasized the importance of the common people. This moment, known as the Tennis Court Oath, marked a bold step toward challenging royal authority and pushing for democratic reforms. It's a key turning point that connects to the broader theme of the revolution, people demanding a say in their government and fighting for their rights. Now let's take a closer look at the turmoil that was unfolding in France during this period. While the National Assembly was busy drafting a new constitution, the country was facing severe hardships. A harsh winter led to poor harvests, which caused bread prices to skyrocket. As a result, bakers started hoarding grain, making it even harder for ordinary people to get enough food. Imagine waiting in long, exhausting lines just to buy bread. That was the reality for many. Frustration boiled over, and some people stormed into shops in anger. This unrest eventually culminated in the storming of the Bastille, a significant event symbolizing the uprising against tyranny. Rumors played a big role in fueling the chaos. People believed that the lords of the manor had hired gangs of brigands to destroy crops and create chaos. This led peasants to attack noble estates, chateaux, looting grains and burning documents that tied them to feudal obligations. Many lords, fearing for their safety, fled their homes or migrated away from the unrest. This entire series of events highlights how economic hardship, rumors, and social unrest combined to ignite revolutionary fervor across France, setting the stage for the broader upheaval that was to come. Now, let's look at the significant decisions made by the National Assembly. Louis XVI finally recognized the existence of the National Assembly, which was a major turning point. This recognition meant that he was beginning to accept the new political reality, although he still held some power. However, he agreed that his authority would now be limited by a constitution, effectively checking his powers and moving towards a constitutional monarchy. On August 4, 1789, a crucial decree was passed by the Assembly. This decree abolished the feudal system, which had kept the common people in serfdom and tied to their landlords, and also eliminated the traditional taxes that heavily burdened the peasants. Additionally, tithes, which were payments to the church, were abolished, and the land owned by the church was confiscated. This was a huge move because the church was a major landholder and had a lot of influence at the time. The assets gained from these confiscations were worth at least 2 billion livres, which was a staggering amount, and helped to address the financial crisis the country was facing. Overall, these decisions marked a dramatic shift toward equality and the redistribution of power, aligning with the broader goals of the revolution to reduce the influence of the monarchy and the church, and to create a more just society. Now, let's take a closer look at the political system established under the Constitution of 1791. This was a pivotal moment in shaping the new government, as it laid out how power would be organized and exercised. Essentially, the Constitution created a limited monarchy, where the king still held some authority but was now balanced by an elected legislative body. The Legislative Assembly was responsible for making laws and managing fiscal policies, which was a significant shift towards more representative governance. This setup was designed to ensure that power was not concentrated in one person or branch, aligning with the broader themes of liberty and constitutional rule that we've been discussing. It was a foundational step in creating a government that aimed to reflect the will of the people, while still maintaining order and stability. In 1791, the National Assembly took a major step forward by drafting a new constitution. This was a pivotal moment because it aimed to limit the powers of the king, establishing a clearer separation of powers among the different branches of government. Specifically, the powers were divided into the legislature, which makes laws, the executive, which enforces them, and the judiciary, which interprets them. The National Assembly also gained the authority to make laws, but interestingly, this was done through an electoral process. These lawmakers were not chosen by the general populace directly, but rather by active citizens. Now, who exactly were these active citizens? They were men over the age of 25 who paid taxes equal to 3 days' wages. It's important to note that this created a distinction between active citizens and passive citizens. The passive citizens included the remaining men who didn't meet these criteria, as well as all women. This division reflected the social and political realities of the time, but it also set the stage for ongoing debates about rights and representation in the new constitutional order. So this slide highlights how the French Revolution was transforming the monarchy into a constitutional monarchy, paving the way for more democratic principles, though not universally applied yet. This is a key example of how revolutionary ideas about sovereignty and citizenship were beginning to reshape France's political landscape. Now let's take a closer look at some of the fundamental rights outlined in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. First, the right to life. This is the most basic of all rights, emphasizing that every human being has the inherent right to live. Without this, no other rights can truly matter. Next, we have the freedom of opinion. This is considered a natural inalienable right, meaning it belongs to each person simply by virtue of being human. And importantly, this right cannot be taken away. It's about the freedom to hold your own beliefs and ideas without fear. Moving on, the freedom of speech is another key point. This allows individuals to express their opinions openly, which is vital for a healthy, functioning society. It's about being able to speak your mind without censorship or interference. Finally, the principle of equality before the law. This means that every person is entitled to the same legal protections and treatment, regardless of their background or status. It's a cornerstone for justice and fairness. All these rights are interconnected and reflect the broader theme of human dignity and the idea that everyone deserves respect and freedom. These principles laid the groundwork for modern human rights and continue to influence our societies today. Let's take a closer look at some common political symbols. First, we have the broken chain. This symbol represents freedom and liberation, especially in the context of overcoming oppression or slavery. When you see a broken chain, it's a powerful visual of breaking free from constraints. Next, we have the bundle of rods, also known as fasces. This symbol traditionally shows a bundle of rods bound together with an axe, and it originates from ancient Rome. The key idea here is that while a single rod can be easily snapped, a bundle of rods remains strong and unbreakable. This leads us to the most important concept. Strength lies in unity. When individual elements come together, they form a much stronger whole. So these symbols, whether the broken chain or the fasces, are about emphasizing collective strength and the importance of working together for a common purpose. In the bigger picture of our presentation, these symbols remind us that unity can be a powerful force for change and resilience in society. Now, let's take a closer look at some powerful political symbols. Here we see the eye within a triangle radiating light. This symbol is quite iconic and carries a lot of meaning. The all-seeing eye represents knowledge and awareness. It's a symbol of enlightenment and insight. The rays of the sun emanating from it are like a metaphor for truth and understanding, driving away the clouds of ignorance that can obscure our vision. Next, we have the scepter, which is traditionally a symbol of royal power and authority. It signifies sovereignty and leadership, reminding us of the strength and legitimacy of those who hold political office. Together, these symbols reflect the idea that true power is rooted in knowledge and wisdom, and that leadership should be based on enlightenment and clarity. They connect back to the overall theme of how symbols shape perceptions of authority and influence in politics. Let's take a closer look at some interesting political symbols. First, we have the snake biting its tail to form a ring. This image is quite powerful because it symbolizes eternity and continuity. The snake, by biting its tail, creates a never-ending circle, which represents the idea of something that has no beginning or end. It's a visual metaphor for concepts like eternity or the cyclical nature of life and history. Next, we see the red Phrygian cap. This cap is historically significant because it was worn by slaves before they gained their freedom. When a slave became free, they would don this distinctive cap as a symbol of their new status. Over time, the red Phrygian cap has also become a broader symbol of liberty and the fight for freedom. Connecting these symbols to the overall theme of political imagery, they both emphasize concepts of freedom, eternity, and the ongoing struggle for rights. The snake ring reminds us of the enduring nature of certain ideals, while the Phrygian cap highlights the transformative power of liberation. Both serve as powerful visual cues that communicate core values in political movements. Let's take a closer look at some important political symbols. First, we have the colors blue, white, and red. These are famously associated with France and are often seen together in the national flag. They symbolize the French Republic and its values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Next, there's the winged woman, which is a powerful emblem of justice and liberty. She often appears in artworks and sculptures representing the ideals of freedom and the rule of law. Speaking of which, the colors and symbols are more than just visual elements. They represent the core principles of the nation. The blue, white, and red are not only national colors, but also a personification of the law itself, embodying the justice and order that underpin the French Republic. When we see these symbols, we're reminded of the fundamental values that guide the nation and its legal system. They serve as visual cues of the people's commitment to justice, liberty, and the rule of law, which are central themes in understanding the political identity of France. Let's take a closer look at the law tablet. This symbol represents the fundamental principle that the law is the same for everyone. No matter who you are, everyone is equal before the law. It's a powerful reminder that justice should be impartial and fair, without favoritism or bias. This idea is central to the concept of equality in a just society. By emphasizing this, the law tablet reinforces that the rule of law is a cornerstone of governance and social order. This ties back to our overall theme of justice, equality, and the importance of shared values in building a fair society. So, even though Louis XVI had signed the Constitution, which was a major step toward limiting royal power, he was secretly negotiating with the King of Prussia. This shows how complex and tense the political situation was. The neighboring rulers, worried about the revolution spreading, were planning to send troops to restore the old order. In response, the National Assembly made a bold move. They voted to declare war against Prussia and Austria. They saw this war not just as a military conflict, but as a fight of the people against the kings and aristocracies that wanted to suppress the revolution. During this time, patriotic songs became very important, and one of the most famous was the Marseillaise, written by Roger de Lisle. It quickly gained popularity, and today it's recognized as the national anthem of France. This whole sequence of events really highlights how the revolution was about more than just political change. It was about a national identity and a fight for liberty. While the men were away fighting at the front, women took on the important tasks of earning a living and caring for their families. During this time, political clubs became a key rallying point for those involved in the revolution. The most successful of these was the Jacobin Club, which actually got its name from a former convent of St. Jacob in Paris. Interestingly, women also formed their own clubs to participate in political discussions and activities. The members of the Jacobin Club were generally less prosperous. Many were shopkeepers, shoemakers, and printers, people from everyday walks of life who wanted change. Their leader was Maximilien Robespierre, a very influential figure during this period. One of the most recognizable symbols of the Jacobins and their supporters was their distinctive clothing. They started wearing long striped trousers and became known as sans-culottes, which means those without knee breeches. This attire became a symbol of their identity and their connection to the common people, highlighting their role in the broader revolutionary movement. Overall, these clubs, especially the Jacobins, played a crucial role in shaping the revolutionary spirit and pushing forward the ideas of equality and change that defined this tumultuous period. Now, let's turn our attention to Maximilien Robespierre, a central figure in the French Revolution. He was a lawyer and politician who became a leading member of the Committee of Public Safety. Robespierre is often associated with the Reign of Terror, a period marked by intense political purges and executions. His ideas about virtue and the need for a republic of virtue drove many of his policies. Interestingly, he believed that moral integrity was essential for revolutionary success. However, his methods and the radical measures he endorsed ultimately led to his downfall. Robespierre's story highlights the complex balance between revolutionary ideals and the dangers of extremism, which ties back to the broader theme of how revolutionary fervor can sometimes spiral into violence and chaos. Let's talk about the sans-culottes, a key group during the French Revolution. The term literally means without breeches, which reflects their status as common folk, working-class citizens. They played a crucial role in pushing forward revolutionary ideas because they were driven by economic hardship and a desire for social equality. Unlike the aristocrats or the bourgeoisie, the sans-culottes were more radical and eager to see swift change. Their passion and activism helped shape major events like the storming of the Bastille. Overall, they symbolize the power of ordinary people uniting for a common cause, reminding us how grassroots movements can influence history profoundly. So here we see the key event known as the Rebellion. The Jacobins, who were a radical political group, orchestrated an insurrection aimed at overthrowing the monarchy. The most dramatic moment happened on August 10th, when they stormed the palace of the Tuileries. This was a bold and violent action, and during the attack, they massacred the king's guards to eliminate any resistance. The king himself was taken hostage, which was a huge turning point. Following this, the revolutionary leaders voted to imprison the royal family, effectively ending their reign. Another important development was the extension of voting rights. Now, all men over the age of 21, regardless of their wealth or social class, gained the right to vote. This was a significant step towards equality and a more democratic society. Overall, this rebellion marks a critical moment in the French Revolution, as it shifted power away from the monarchy and towards the people, aligning with the broader theme of challenging traditional authority and pushing for political change. Now, let's talk about the convention, which was the name given to the newly elected assembly during this pivotal time. On September 21st, 1792, a major turning point occurred. The monarchy was abolished, and France was declared a republic. This meant that instead of a king or queen ruling, the people now had the power to elect their government, including the leader of the nation. A key figure in this period was Louis XVI. He was sentenced to death for treason, which was a monumental moment in revolutionary history. On January 21, 1793, he was executed publicly at de la Concorde, sending a powerful message about the end of monarchy. Shortly after, Marie Antoinette, Louis's wife, faced the same fate. This phase marked the complete shift from monarchy to a republic, emphasizing the revolutionary ideals of popular sovereignty and the rejection of old regime privileges. It's a crucial part of understanding how revolutionary France radically transformed its political landscape, setting the stage for further shifts and upheavals. Now, let's talk about the period from 1793 to 1794, which is known as the Reign of Terror. During this time, Robespierre implemented very strict control and harsh punishments to maintain what he saw as the revolutionary ideals. He believed that anyone he considered an enemy of the Republic, whether they were ex-nobles, clergy, members of other political parties, or even members of his own group who disagreed with his methods, needed to be dealt with decisively. These individuals were often arrested, thrown into prison, and then brought before a revolutionary tribunal for trial. The key point here is that the tribunals acted swiftly and severely. If the court found someone guilty, that person was usually guillotined. Now, the guillotine itself is quite a stark device, comprising 2 poles and a blade, used to behead individuals. It became a symbol of this tumultuous period. Interestingly, it was named after Dr. Guillotin, who actually invented it, aiming to make executions more humane, though it became infamous for its widespread use during the Terror. This chapter in history highlights how revolutionary ideals can sometimes lead to extreme measures, emphasizing the importance of justice and the dangers of unchecked power. It's a crucial part of understanding the broader themes of the French Revolution, how ideals can be challenged by the methods used to achieve them. Let's take a look at the guillotine. This device became one of the most recognizable symbols of the French Revolution. It was designed as a humane and efficient method of execution, replacing more brutal methods used previously. The guillotine's significance goes beyond its function. It represented a shift towards justice and equality in the eyes of the revolutionaries. By using a single device for executions, it aimed to eliminate class distinctions and make punishment more uniform. Its use also reflects the intense societal upheaval of the time, as revolutionary ideals clashed with old regimes. Overall, the guillotine is a powerful symbol of the revolutionary spirit and the drastic changes that France was going through during this period. Now, let's talk about the Reign of Terror. During this period, Robespierre's government took drastic measures to control the economy and enforce equality. They set a maximum ceiling on wages and prices to prevent inflation and protect the common people. Meat and bread were rationed, meaning supplies were limited and distributed in a controlled way. Peasants were actually required to bring their grain to the cities and sell it at prices fixed by the government, ensuring fair access for everyone. A notable cultural change was the ban on white flour, which was more expensive, and the introduction of what was called the pain d'égalité, or equality bread, made from whole wheat, to symbolize unity. Additionally, the way people addressed each other shifted. Instead of using traditional titles like Monsieur and Madame, everyone was called citoyen or citoyenne, meaning citizen, emphasizing the revolutionary idea of equality. The revolution also targeted religion. Churches were shut down, and their buildings repurposed as barracks or offices, reflecting the move away from traditional institutions. And finally, Robespierre himself met a tragic end. In July 1794, he was convicted by a court, arrested, and the very next day he was sent to the guillotine. This marked the conclusion of the Reign of Terror and the fall of Robespierre. All these measures show how the revolution sought to reshape society, sometimes through harsh, radical methods, to establish equality and control. Now, let's take a look at the Directory rules in France. After the turmoil of the revolution, a new constitution was introduced. This constitution, however, restricted voting rights, denying the vote to non-propertied sections of society, which meant that only those with property could participate in elections. It also established 2 elected legislative councils, which were responsible for making laws. These councils then appointed a 5-member executive body called the Directory. The Directory was meant to provide leadership and stability, but it was often marked by internal conflicts. In fact, the directors frequently clashed with the legislative councils, which sometimes tried to dismiss them. This ongoing political instability created a lot of chaos and uncertainty in France. Ultimately, this unstable environment paved the way for a new leader, Napoleon Bonaparte, who rose to power as a military dictator. His rise was a direct consequence of the weaknesses and conflicts within the Directory system, showing how political instability can lead to the emergence of strong, centralized authority. So, did women have a revolution? Well, most women of the Third Estate actually had to work just to make a living. They often worked as seamstresses or laundresses, or sold flowers, fruits, and vegetables at the market. Many were employed as domestic servants in the homes of the wealthy. But it's important to note that most women didn't have access to education or job training, which limited their opportunities. Only daughters of nobles or wealthier Third Estate families could study at a convent, and even then, their families often arranged marriages afterward. Working women also had a lot on their plates at home. They were responsible for cooking, fetching water, standing in line for bread, and caring for their children. And unfortunately, their wages were lower than what men earned. All of this highlights how limited their roles and opportunities were, even during times of social upheaval. It really connects to the overall theme of the presentation, showing how the social structure affected different groups differently, and how women's roles were often dictated by economic and social constraints. So, did women actually have a revolution? Well, in many ways, yes. Women began to organize themselves to voice their interests and push for change. They started their own political clubs and newspapers to make sure their voices were heard. In fact, around 60 women's clubs emerged across different French cities, showing a real surge in women's political engagement. One of the most notable groups was the Society of Revolutionary and Republican Women, which gained quite a bit of attention at the time. However, despite these efforts, women were quite disappointed with the outcome of the 1791 Constitution. It didn't grant them the rights they were fighting for. Instead, it reduced women to passive citizens, basically saying they could no longer participate actively in political life. This was a huge setback. Women demanded much more. They wanted the right to vote, to be elected to the assembly, and to hold political office. These demands highlight their desire for equality and their recognition as active participants in shaping the new France. So, while the revolution created opportunities for some, women's aspirations for full political rights remained largely unfulfilled, which is an important part of understanding the broader revolutionary story. So, did women really have a revolution? Well, in many ways, yes. With the establishment of state schools, education became compulsory for all girls, which was a huge step forward. No longer could their fathers force them into marriage against their will, giving women more control over their own lives. Marriage itself was transformed into a contract that women could enter into freely, and it was officially registered under civil law, making it more equitable and transparent. Divorce also became legal, allowing women to leave unhappy or abusive marriages. All these changes opened the door for women to train for jobs, pursue careers as artists, or run small businesses, really expanding their opportunities. But the fight for equality didn't stop there. Women's movements advocating for voting rights and equal wages persisted for centuries across many countries. And a landmark moment was reached in 1946, when women in France finally gained the right to vote. This was a pivotal achievement, marking a significant milestone in the ongoing struggle for women's rights and equality around the world. Now, let's talk about the abolition of slavery and the key regions involved. When we look at the colonies in the Caribbean, such as Martinique, Guadeloupe, and San Domingo, modern-day Haiti, these places played a significant role in the history of slavery and its eventual abolition. These colonies were major centers for the production of crops like tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. The economy in these regions was heavily reliant on enslaved labor to cultivate and harvest these valuable commodities. it's also important to understand the terminology used during this period. The term Negroes was commonly used to refer to the indigenous people of Africa, south of the Sahara. However, it's crucial to note that this term is now considered derogatory and is no longer in common use. Recognizing this helps us understand the historical context and the language of the time, while also respecting the dignity of the people involved. Connecting this to the overall theme, the history of these colonies highlights how economic interests were intertwined with human rights issues. The movement towards abolishing slavery was a pivotal moment that reshaped societies and challenged long-standing systems of exploitation. Let's take a closer look at the triangular slave trade, which connected Europe, Africa, and the Americas in a brutal cycle. French merchants, for example, would set out from ports like Bordeaux or Nantes and sail to the African coast. There, they would typically buy slaves directly from local chieftains, often through complex negotiations and exchanges. Once they had their captives, these individuals were branded and shackled, then packed tightly into ships for the harrowing 3-month voyage across the Atlantic. This journey was incredibly harsh and inhumane. When they arrived in the Caribbean, the slaves were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor was crucial because it fueled the production of commodities like sugar, coffee, and indigo, which were in high demand across Europe. This entire system was driven by greed and had devastating human costs, but it also played a key role in shaping the economic landscape of the time. Understanding this helps us see how deeply intertwined economic interests and human suffering were in the history of slavery. Now, let's look at the abolition of slavery in France. The National Assembly engaged in lengthy debates on this issue, but interestingly, they didn't pass any laws right away. The main reason was their fear of opposition from businessmen, many of whom depended heavily on the profits from the slave trade. It wasn't until 1794, during the convention, that a significant step was finally taken. They legislated to free all slaves in France's overseas possessions, marking a major milestone. However, this progress was short-lived. 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery, which shows how complex and contested this issue was at the time. It wasn't until 1848 that slavery was truly abolished in the French colonies, closing a chapter of a long and difficult struggle. This sequence highlights the evolving stance of France on slavery and underscores how economic interests and political changes influence the timeline of abolition. So, in this part of the revolution, the revolutionary governments aimed to put their ideas of liberty and equality into action in everyday life. One of the first major steps was in 1789, when censorship was abolished. This was a huge move because it meant that people could now express their opinions openly without fear of punishment. Freedom of the press became a reality, allowing opposing views on current events to be shared freely. This change led to a flood of newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flowing into towns across France. These publications didn't just stay in the cities, they traveled rapidly into the countryside as well. This dissemination of ideas was crucial because it helped spread revolutionary ideals beyond urban centers, reaching everyday people and influencing their perspectives. Overall, these measures transformed the way information was shared and contributed significantly to shaping public opinion, making the revolution's ideas a part of daily life for many. So, in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte took a monumental step by crowning himself Emperor of France, marking a new chapter in French history. He saw himself as a modernizer of Europe, aiming to bring order and reform across the continent. To do that, he introduced many important laws, for example, protecting private property, which was crucial for economic stability, and establishing a uniform system of weights and measures based on the decimal system, making trade and communication much easier. Initially, many people viewed Napoleon as a liberator, someone who would bring freedom and stability after the chaos of the revolution. But as his power grew, so did his ambitions, leading to widespread conflicts across Europe. Ultimately, his quest for dominance ended at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where he was finally defeated. This slide reminds us how Napoleon's leadership was complex. Initially seen as progressive, but ending in downfall, and how his impact on law and reform still echoes today. The legacy of the French Revolution is primarily rooted in the ideas of liberty and democratic rights. These concepts became incredibly influential and spread from France across Europe during the 19th century. As these ideas traveled, they inspired colonized peoples to reframe their struggles, moving from fighting against bondage to creating their own sovereign nation-states. For example, figures like Tipu Sultan in India and Ramohan Roy responded to these revolutionary ideas, adapting them to their own contexts. Their actions show how the revolutionary ideals of freedom and sovereignty resonated beyond France, shaping movements for independence and reform worldwide. This highlights how the French Revolution's core principles helped forge new visions of nationhood and individual rights that continue to influence the modern world. Now, let's take a moment to look at two influential figures in Indian history, Tipu Sultan and Raja Ram Mohan Roy. Tipu Sultan, often called the Tiger of Mysore, was a fierce leader who resisted British expansion and fought valiantly to defend his kingdom's sovereignty. His resistance symbolizes the early struggle against colonial domination. On the other hand, Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a social reformer and thinker who played a crucial role in modernizing Indian society. He challenged social practices like sati and worked towards educational and religious reforms. Both of these figures, though different in their approaches, Tipu Sultan through military resistance and Roy through social reform, share a common theme of fighting for India's dignity and progress. Their efforts laid important groundwork for future movements towards independence and social change. So, as we reflect on their contributions, we see how diverse strategies, military resistance and social reform, can both be vital in shaping a nation's path forward.